Yes, indeed. What might he be using for money? Welcome to the second part of my interview with Rick Rule, where we will do a little bit more conversation about the numbers, social security, a deep dive into Battle Bank and why he thinks this is going to be something for people to sit up and perhaps use in the future. And finally, some wise words towards the end of this conversation from Rick about what we should all be doing. Enjoy the second part of this conversation.
In the real world, you have to pay for all those. So what might he use for money?
He'll print it.
People. Correct. Correct. And what happens to the value of existing currency units when you make brand new phony ones?
You and I
Goes
both
down.
know devaluation again. But
I really want to
sorry.
share the arithmetic. I want to share the arithmetic with your audience because the
Okay.
audience gets too caught up in narrative. They say Trump is going to kiss it and make it feel better, so I don't have to worry about it. This is wrong, Carrie. This is wrong. Let's look at simple arithmetics.
Okay.
Right now, the on balance sheet liability of the US government, which is to say the money that they owe bondholders, is $36 trillion. Now, it is true that they have 6 trillion of their own from prior counterfeiting. So just for fun, let's take that 136 trillion and make it 129 trillion.
Now, hang on a second. You mean 36 trillion? You just
Yeah,
said
36 trillion. I'm sorry, and make
136
it 29 trillion.
and
But
make it
and
129.
that's the widely quoted number. Note, by the way, that that number gets bigger every year by $2.5 trillion.
Mm-hmm.
But that isn't the scary number either, as scary as it is. The scary number is that the net present value, the value in today's dollars, discounted, of future obligations, entitlements that the American citizens have voted for each other, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, federal government pensions, Trump's own pension, military pensions, that number, according to the Congressional Budget Office, not some fat, bald, cranky old libertarian, exceeds $100 trillion. That number, according to the Congressional Budget Office, increases by $2.5 trillion a year. So if you add the on balance sheet debt with the off balance sheet debt, what you see is that at the federal level, not state, local, corporate, or individual, at the federal level, we're $130 trillion upside down.
Hmm.
And that number grows by $4.5 trillion a year. The gross federal income before any government spending, that is all the money that the government takes in before it spends a dime, is less than $5 trillion.
Oh, wow.
So the debt grows by 4.5, while the gross income before we spend any money at all is $5 trillion. And it gets worse, Gary. The Internal Revenue Service, which knows all things about money for Americans, estimates that the current net private wealth in America, all the money owned by entities other than the government, is $141 trillion. So never mind if you increased our taxes, if you stole all the money that we have, all the money that we have, you could operate the increase in expenditure for 2 years after you extinguish the debt. This isn't narrative. This is just math. We're worth 141 billion, pardon me. I get those zeros confused.
Yeah.
We're worth 141, we owe 130, and we dig ourselves $4.5 trillion a year deeper in debt. Now, how do we resolve this problem? Do we say to the old folks like me, with regards to your Social Security, too bad, so sad, we lied, strong letter to follow? Medicare, not too bad, you die, right? Or Do we do what we did in the 70s? Do we inflate away the net present value of the nominal promises that we made?
I
I
suggest
don't think we
that.
have any choice but to do the latter. In the decade of the 70s, uh, over 10 years, we made 75% of the nominal value of those obligations go away. And that's what we're going to do again. Not coincidentally, in the decade of the 70s, the gold price went from $35 to $850. Now, caveat to that, 35 to 100 was probably a function of allowing the private ownership of gold in the US and removing the price cap. So let's say really that the price of gold was only up eightfold or eight and a half fold. My suspicion is that if you reduce the purchasing power of the US dollar by 75%, which is what I think will happen, that
Wow.
the gold price likely in response is up threefold or fourfold as a consequence of that.
Right.
Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's only half that.
What about if they turn around? Because back in the 70s and even the 80s, we didn't have blockchain, we didn't have technology, we didn't have central bank digital currencies, we didn't have the possibility of the Federal Reserve to say, do you know what, we're going to buy X number of Bitcoin. And once we've done that, we're going to put everything into a central bank digital currency, and maybe it's backed by Bitcoin. I don't know, but I'm just saying, is there a potential for them to use technology and not gold per se to be able to restart, re-kick, get rid of, rather than inflating away all of this debt?
Well, if you believe that the government can use technology to pay their debts,
So I'm thinking,
I guess the answer to that is yes. I haven't seen any evidence to suggest that government processes have been particularly improved by technology. Mr. Musk has said that he's begun to look at the software programming in government agencies, and some of it is as much as 50 years old.
oh, wow.
Uh, that would that would lead me to conclude that the government is not an early adopter. Um, I'm trying to be polite.
Yeah.
These guys make it hard. Um, I think government is good at some things. They're good at finding external enemies and attacking them, which is to say they're good at war.
Yeah, correct.
I don't think war is a good thing. You know, let me not get off on a government tirade.
Yeah, yeah.
I,
Listen, mate, that's another hour-long conversation.
I'm inclined to do that. I just want your listeners to focus on the on the math.
Yeah.
Don't focus on whether you like Trump or you don't like Trump.
Okay.
I don't like him. I didn't like the last person.
Mhm.
Focus on $130 trillion in debt. Focus on the fact that the debt gets $4.5 trillion worse every year. Focus on the fact that right now at these interest rates, 30%, 38% of the US budget goes to debt service.
38%.
Not spending. Not spending.
Wow.
That isn't of the total budget, by the way. That is the relationship between debt service and income. Focus on the arithmetic. After you've focused on the arithmetic, focus on the political feasibility of a default. There's only two answers to the circumstance that we're in. We could either be honest and say to the holders of US treasuries, we lied, we're not going to pay you. And say to Social Security recipients, military pension recipients, Medicare recipients, Medicaid recipients, federal government pensioners, too bad, so sad. Yes, we promise you're not going to get the money. We could either default honestly, highly unlikely in my viewpoint, or we can default dishonestly by inflating away the net present value of the obligation,
And do
like we
you
did in the 1970s.
and do you think the same narrative occurs to other places around the world? A lot of my listeners are in Australia. Have we got the same issue on a smaller scale down here?
I'm not as intimately familiar
with the numbers.
with what your entitlements are. I know that your superannuation system is
It's good.
enormously better than our social security system.
Way better. Yeah.
I don't know anything about the promises that Australians have made to each other with regards to healthcare. I do know that your some state governments are in pretty good shape uh, with their income relative to their expenditures. You know, I look at, as an example, WA with the iron ore exports. They make so much money, even they can't waste it,
Yeah.
which takes a special skill. I will say this, when people look at currencies around the world, and I disparage over the US dollar, my friend Doug Casey says the US dollar is the worst currency in the world, with the sole exception of all the other ones.
Yeah.
Investors around the world look at the euro relative to the US dollar, they say the dollar is pretty good. When they look at the Australian dollar relative to the US dollar, they say the US dollar is pretty good. I guess what I'm saying is that the US dollar is the prettiest mare at the slaughterhouse.
Yeah.
We will do well compared to other currencies, but we won't do well absolutely. That tells me that the market is saying that as much trouble as the US government is in a global context, it's not that bad. I don't want to make specific reference to Australia because I'm not specifically informed. I'm sadly very painfully well informed about the US circumstance.
Sure. Sure. Look, we don't have a lot of time left, but one of the things I did, and look, just a quick comment, if you could, very quick comment, because I want to get on to Battle Bank in a minute, but a quick comment on China. Do you think that China is going to continue growth, or do you think, because of course Australia and Australian resources rely heavily on China. I think we should be looking at India as well. I'm sure we are, but just a quick comment, if you like, on the growth of China versus India versus Southeast Asia.
China's growth is going to grow, but it's going to grow in less dramatic leaps and bounds because it's difficult to continue that growth, percentage growth, from a larger base. I think, unfortunately, too, the humility that the Chinese government exhibited 30 years ago is gone. I think you have 10,000 people in the Politburo who believe that they have the wisdom to determine the wishes of 1.3 billion people. And I don't think that works. I think they're in for a rough patch. I think they have too much non-bank financial debt. I think that the banks have lent money for political expedience. And I think that needs to resolve itself. I have a huge confidence in the Chinese people. Their predilection to family, their predilection to saving, their predilection to investment, the abject terror that they still feel to work and save, those are all good things. I don't think that even Xi is competent enough that he can derail China.
Right.
Although I think he'll give it his best lick. The idea that 10,000 people without a feedback mechanism can run the lives of 1.3 billion people doesn't seem intelligent to me.
Right.
But I think that the collective will and competence of the Chinese people is over 20 years big enough to defeat their own leadership.
Interesting.
In times past, Carrie, I was very close to the leadership of Zijin Mining and very close to the people at CITIC, China International Trade and Investment. And I'm still reasonably familiar with those people. And they tell you some interesting things. They tell you that even after all the advances that you've seen in China in the last 30 years, that there's still over 100 million people that need to be urbanized, which is to say,
wow,
the increase in Chinese living standards isn't done yet.
So there will
There
still
is
be a need for resources from Australia.
absolutely,
That's
absolutely
mainly what I wanted to know.
zero doubt. It could be interrupted, but the existing inventory of steel buildings per capita in China relative to Australia would suggest that the place is only 15% built.
Wow. Okay.
and they need your iron. They need your coal, and unlike you, they're willing to use it.
Oh, don't get me started on that
Um, so yeah, and the Chinese are, I mean, they're going to negotiate with you hard.
one.
They're going to do that, but they have a wonderful sense of how valuable you are to them.
Okay, interesting. Okay, so don't panic, Australia. Don't panic about resources. There's a lot
I'm
of
sorry.
need for, there's a lot of need for resources from not just China but around the world.
I mean, that's the other thing you have to look at. It hasn't been as dramatic, but look at the increase in living standards in Indonesia,
Mm,
in Vietnam,
yeah,
in India. Uh, Carrie, there's a billion people on Earth who have no access to primary electricity. They want to live like you and I.
mm.
We've done a
Good.
wonderful job in the last 35 years of increasing the living standards of 2 billion people from desperately poor to merely poor. There's a billion people to go before we finish the job. And when poor people get more money, the thing that brings utility to their lives are material things.
Right.
When you and I get more money, we buy some little gadget from Apple, and the utility in that gadget has nothing to do with material stuff. When poor people get more money, they use concrete block as opposed to mud for their house. They go from barefoot to tennis shoes to a bicycle to a 50cc motorcycle to a Toyota Hilux. They put a steel roof on their shed. The point is that when poor people get more money, the stuff that adds value is made of stuff.
Right.
And Australia is in the stuff business.
Okay. Good point. Good point. So you're bullish, and I know this was a deep dive into gold today, but very
Yep,
quickly, you're bullish generally on commodities. Last time we spoke, you were very bullish on nickel, but across the
absolutely.
board, pretty bullish on most commodities.
With the caveat that I'm an old man and I've become very patient. I think in 5 year stretches. I
Right.
would say if there was a problem, Carrie, that I've learned from most people who listen to podcasts like this, is that they absorb very long term narratives. They invest based on long term narratives and they have short term tactics. That doesn't work out very well. If you think the iron price and the copper price are going to do well over 5 years and you have trauma holding stock over a long weekend, it's going to be very difficult for your investment results to resemble your thesis.
Mm, mm. Patience, grasshoppers, patience. That's what Rick is saying. Just quickly, Battle Bank. The reason I wanted to bring it up, I won't mention the bank, but it was one of the big four down here in Australia, have managed to freeze my business bank accounts 3 times over the last couple of months, which is interesting. No warning. You just go to use your account and it says, you're locked out. Please contact us, which for me is kind of frightening, the amount of control that they have. And I have heard from others that they're experiencing the same. Now, I don't know if you're wearing a Battle Bank shirt today, but I do know he does. He's got his Battle Bank shirt on. There we go. Talk to us about Battle Bank. I really want our audience to know now, ladies and gentlemen, it's not coming to Australia yet, but I love what Rick's doing in terms of shaking things up. Over to you,
Well, the story really goes back to our last bank, which is called Everbank.
the bank.
That bank came to be in the year 2000. From a standing start, we built it to $28 billion in deposits before we sold it. And we did it for precisely the reasons that you've talked about. We were all dissatisfied from the service that we were getting from our existing banks. They were too big. They regarded our money as theirs. Uh, and we created a bank. We could never compete with them, but they could never compete with us. And so we grew. How did we do it? Well, we didn't try to be all things for all people. We decided to focus on a market that was you and I, Carrie, aspiring people who care enough about their own financial future to take control of it. We decided that our bank wasn't going to have branches, that our bank's branch was going to be your computer and your phone. For people who weren't technologically sophisticated enough to do that, we decided they should bank elsewhere. We decided to call all the big banks banks for poor, dumb people. Um, we concentrated on a different demographic. The big banks in our country would have 10 or 15 different deposit products. when all they needed was one.
Yeah.
They had 15 deposit products because they wanted to fool their customers, and we wanted
Yeah.
to serve our customers. We
Yeah.
had one deposit product. We paid you interest on your checking account. You know, you could do automatic bill pay, but we paid you interest. There are several trillion dollars on deposits in US banks that don't pay interest. That's insane.
Yep.
Truly insane. We decided too that not all Americans wanted to save all of their money in US dollars. There are, mercifully in our country, lots of first generation immigrants, many from Australia. And they had a need to bank both in US dollars and in Australian dollars. Maybe they had a business in the US and they imported stuff from Australia. They had to pay in Australian dollars. They received US dollars. So we allowed people in the US to save in 28 currencies, not just the US dollar. That ended up being an $8 billion deposit product for us. Serving the market where it was. Because we didn't have branches, we saved 1.5% on non-interest expense.
Mhm.
And because we didn't have 300 products, we had a few products, we knew them well. We could hire very high quality bankers who would answer the phone on the fifth ring, not send it to an automatic demon answering machine, but a living human being who would answer the phone and who could understand our products and take you through how to access our products. It was novel. We provided service. Nobody ever thought of that in banking before. I'm being a little facetious.
Just a
But
bit.
that turned out to be highly, highly, highly successful. We sold the bank. That was great. We made a lot of money, drove off into the sunset. And the people who bought our bank used it for their own purposes, which they should. It was TIAA CREF that bought our bank. They had 1.5 million retired teachers and civil servants as customers, and they had a different product need than our customers did. And so the products and services that made our bank unique attenuated over time and then were abandoned.
Right.
And the 275,000 customers that we built up on Battle Bank started emailing us saying, hey, our bank has abandoned us. I ignored that for a while. You know, I'm an old man. I don't want to start another bank.
Yeah.
But after a while, an entrepreneur looks at a market like that, particularly where that market's comprised of his friends, says, you know what? I'm going to come back. So what are we going to do? Well, mostly the same thing. We're going to have one money market account that you can write checks on if you want to, and we're going to pay you interest on it. We're going to offer certificates of deposit in 20 currencies to start, not just US dollars. Unlike our last bank, because this is a new product, we have a savings product in this country called an IRA, individual retirement account.
Mhm.
Most IRAs in the United States are receptacles for mutual funds and annuities and Wall Street products. But our IRA is very different. We will allow you to own an owner-operated duplex or triplex or fourplex. We'll allow you to buy a franchise.
Oh,
We'll allow you to invest in crypto or private equity. Anything that's legal, we'll allow you to do. Your IRA becomes your IRA. For our customer base, 275,000 aspiring self-activated people, this product is going to cut through the market like a hot knife through butter. And
so
then finally,
that's very much like, I think, if I get this right, our self-managed super funds down in Australia. So we have funds where, our IRA. I mean, is that right?
well,
Is our
your super, I think, mostly has to go into financial products. I don't know if you can buy a duplex in your super,
you
or
can.
if you could. Can you? Okay, yeah. Then it's very
So
much the same. If you could,
you
if you
can
could buy
buy.
like a McDonald's or franchise or
I'm not
whatever.
sure about franchise, but you can
Yep.
hold gold in your super fund in Australia.
Yep.
You can hold silver, so precious metals. You can have property in your super fund, fine
Wonderful.
art, just things that, yeah.
Well, that's new to our country. So
Right.
I'm delighted that we're finally catching up to Australia. And then the final thing that we're doing that I think will interest your audience is that no American bank provides what are in effect margin loans for physical gold and silver held in segregated accounts. We've identified about $33 billion US dollars in segregated accounts in Brinks, Loomis, and Viamat in physical gold and silver. And the banks don't seem to think that's good collateral. Uh, despite the fact that there's a liquid market for it 24 hours a day.
Yeah.
So we're going to provide liquidity options for people who own physical gold and silver. Let's say you own $1 million worth of gold and you want to borrow $500,000 to make a down payment on a revenue property,
Hmm.
or to buy a summer cottage for your family, something like that. You don't want to sell your gold and silver, but you want to access the liquidity temporarily until you can replace it some other way. We'll affect that. No other bank in the United States does that. We'll be the first. This is a community that we can talk to because we've been talking to that community for almost 50 years. We're part of it.
Yeah. Yeah,
I
that's really
suspect
good.
our customer acquisition cost in that business is going to be zero. Uh, if you look at the advantage that we'll have in customer acquisition cost and put that next to the advantage that we'll have being branchless, saving 1.5% in non-interest expense, I think you can understand the competitive position that we'll enjoy in this bank.
And in the regards to that, will you also be potentially looking at a globe, like you're talking US? A lot of my people are down here. Take a while so say if somebody down here has got a sort of $1 million worth of gold, they want to open up an account with Battle Bank, they can't do that at
Uh,
the moment.
we we will not initially be able to establish deposit relationships for Australians. We need to suffer through American regulation first. We will be open in our first year to Americans and Canadians. At Battle Bank, it took us a year or a year and a half to uh, comply with Australian government regulations in terms of taking deposits from Australians.
Right.
As soon as we can establish a depository relationship in Australia with a high quality depository, we will happily lend to Australians against physical gold and silver. You don't have to be a customer of ours for us to do that. As
Oh,
soon as we can establish proper depository relationships, assuming that Australian consumer credit laws will allow foreigners to offer credit to Australians. And I don't know the laws around that.
yeah, I don't either. So
I
if
know that
anyone does out there, comment below.
we'll be able to offer that service in Singapore and Switzerland almost immediately. And my hope is that we'll be able to offer it in Australian, in Australia too. Although I don't want to make promises I can't keep.
No, no. All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'll put some links down below. Battle Bank changing the ways that we access gold, that leverage, that ability, I think is fantastic. Rick, could you just finish up with me today? We're coming into Christmas. I said right at the start, investing in gold can be intimidating, but also rewarding. Unintimidate for my people out there and just give them 3 reasons why, or you can do 4 actually, because it's you, Rick, why it's not intimidating and why they should be getting better educated.
Well, the reasons are easy. Uh, Collectively, we owe each other more than we can pay. And the consequence of that is that all countries are going to suffer inflation. That's what's going to happen. Gold historically has done well during periods of time when people are concerned about the maintenance of their purchasing power in savings products denominated in their domestic currency. And anybody who isn't concerned about that is somebody who can't add and subtract. It's just as simple as that. So that's the reason. Uh, the means are fairly easy. By all means, go to Carrie's seminar where people will be there who can hold you by the hand and do it. But own physical gold, own some. It's okay with me if you buy it and put it in a safe deposit box. It's okay with me if you have a deposit receipt. Probably not okay with me, although it's none of my business. If you buy it and bury it in the backyard,
Hmm.
that exposes you to a different set of risks that I wouldn't want to be responsible for. Buy the ETF if that suits you. You do have counterparty risk there, but buy the ETF if it suits you. But it's important that you do it. At the Gold Boot Camp and at Carrie's conference, we'll have a much deeper discussion of how you own physical gold and how you own the surrogates and who you might buy it from. What are the pitfalls? We'll do that. We don't have time to do it today, or else I would. I love giving this information away. For those of you who want to go beyond insurance, invest in the highest quality gold companies in the world. Invest in ones that have a history of the good allocation of capital, that have good balance sheets, and that have good product pipelines. There are probably 40 large gold producers in the world. There are 5 or 6 or 7 worth owning. Uh, it is possible to tell you how to determine that, but it's not possible to tell you how to do that in 2 minutes. We'll do that in the boot camp.
Yeah.
If you're willing to take risk, if you're willing to speculate, not just invest, you can generate real alpha in a gold bull market. You can separate the wheat from the chaff. You can separate the 5 or 10% of juniors that have a chance from the 90% that constitute the great unwashed. This is not for people who aren't tolerant of volatility. This is not for people who aren't tolerant of risk. And this is not for people who are lazy. We will teach you in this boot camp and others how to separate the wheat from the chaff in the juniors, but only for those people who are willing to do the work. That's an important caveat with regards to my boot camp and with regards to Carrie's seminar. If you aren't prepared to do the work, don't come. These are not products for people who come for entertainment. These are products for people who intend to take enough time out of their life that they can educate themselves with regards to the processes involved and get ahead. In both circumstances, or hopefully hopefully the customers will take advantage of 2 circumstances. We will arm you for a subject that I think will be of increasing importance over the next 10 years. But you got to meet us halfway. Yeah. You have to come prepared to do the work, and you have to work.
Rick, really good advice. And ladies and gentlemen, I love the fact that Rick's boot camp is on the 11th of January. And what I want you to do is I want you to spend your time understanding, revisiting, because you won't be able to take it all in one hit. There's too much information. They're going to talk about things like why the most successful stock investors, why do they hold gold in their portfolio? Why Bitcoin's not digital, how to invest in physical gold, how to assess various storage options, evaluating coin deal. Like there's so much information that you're going to find out. And where you position precious metals in a diversified portfolio, because I often speak about diversification. So that's 8 hours. And for those of you in Australia, you'll listen to it post the live, and then you'll listen to it again and again and again. And the reason I, again, brought Rick on today was because 11th of January, not that far away. It's before Australia Day for you, those of you down here. So you've got time to actually take and absorb all that information. And then I want you to come to Gold Coast Gold on the 13th and 14th of March. And by then you'll have done your homework. You'll know what questions to ask, and you'll be much more fully informed and aware. We're going to have some really fun things and lots of education. But for now, please wish my good friend, Rick Rule. And just lastly, don't forget Rule Investment Symposium, Boca Raton, Florida, July. I will be there, as will Mr. Rule, and it will be fantastic. So Rick, Merry Christmas to you and to Bonnie. Have a wonderful break if you are going to take a break. I look forward to seeing you in person in July, but we'll speak again before then. Thanks so much.
Great, Carrie. Thank you. And good luck with your conference. I look forward to seeing you and your friends at our boot camp. And I love the fact that we're sort of a foundation that you can put an Australian varnish on afterwards. That's great.
Fantastic. Thanks, Rick.